Good evening, everyone. Am I audible? Please respond if I'm audible. Okay. Thank you so much. Welcome to the analysis of part 2 of the interim budget 24-25. In the last week, I hope you must be able to recall, we had analyzed the part 1 of the interim budget. In the part 1 of the interim budget, we had discussed in detail all the aspects related to the public finance aspect of the interim budget. I hope you are able to recall. Last week we had covered in detail the trends in terms of tax to GDP ratio, trends in terms of fiscal deficit, trends in terms of debt. Apart from that, we also covered the basic aspect, that is difference between union budget, interim budget, difference between interim budget, voter account, and so on. In today's discussion, that is part 2 of the interim budget, we shall take a deep dive into various aspects of the interim budget. So in this particular video, in this particular discussion, what I have done, the entire interim budget, I have broken it down into various dimensions of your UPSC syllabus. That is dimensions such as agriculture, infrastructure, inclusive growth and development, social infrastructure, and so on. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cover each of these dimensions by adopting a 360-degree approach. And let me tell you, in this particular class, I have not limited my discussion only to the aspects of interim budget. Apart from the interim budget, I have also included, number one, the report of the finance ministry, which is the annual review of the finance ministry, as well as re-examining narratives, a collection of essays written by chief economic advisor. So in this particular aspect, is there some problem with the audio? Please check if the audio is clear now, all of you.
There is a lot of echo, sir.
lot of echo.
Yes, sir. So देखिए आप सुनिए ऊपर क्वालिटी आवाज की कैसी है.
Chief economic advisor.
What to do? माइक चेंज कर देगा माइक.
Please hold for some time. We are fixing the problem with the audio.
वहाँ से भी कर रहे हैं. कंटिन्यू बोलिए. बोलिए बोलिए।
हेलो
अभी बोला था नहीं आए। कम कर दीदी को हेलो 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 हेलो
हेलो हेलो हेलो हेलो हेलो हेलो हेलो हेलो हेलो हेलो अभी ठीक है। हेलो
अभी जो आपने हेलो किया सिग्नल वॉल्यूम कम करके रखा है तो कहाँ से
नहीं अभी मैं चेक कर रहा था ना, यहाँ से इन्होंने वॉल्यूम कम कर रखा था ना, इसलिए मैं कह रहा हूँ आवाज़ क्यों नहीं आ रही है। अब कंटिन्यू करो, अब देखो एक बार वो ऑन कीजिएगा। इसको ऐसे रखना है। यस प्लीज चेक इफ द ऑडियो इज फाइन नाउ। Okay. Yeah. So extremely sorry for the inconvenience caused. So like I was saying, in the last week we had covered the part 1 of the interim budget. In this particular part, we shall take a deep dive into the interim budget. So what I have basically done, the entire interim budget discussion, I have broken it into different themes related to your UPSC syllabus. For example, themes such as agriculture, infrastructure, inclusive growth and development, sustainable development, external sector, and so on. And when I'm going to carry out an analysis of the interim budget, I have not confined myself only to the aspects of interim budget. Apart from interim budget, I have also taken into consideration the annual review published by the Ministry of Finance, as well as re-examining narratives, a collection of essays published by the Chief Economic Advisor. So without wasting much time, let me tell you what all things I will be covering in this particular discussion of ours. As you can see, we will be starting with the basic overview of the Indian economy. So as you know, this time there is no economic survey, but instead of economic survey, the Ministry of Finance has published a document called as Indian Economy a Review. So just like how the economic survey provides a bird's eye view of the economy, this document also serves the same purpose. So from this particular document, we are going to look into the important trends in the macroeconomic indicators, like trends in terms of nominal GDP, real GDP, investment, savings, and so on. So this is the first aspect. Second aspect, as you can see, as far as the theme of agriculture is concerned, this particular theme of agriculture, I have broken it into three different aspects. The first aspect is with respect to important announcements in this year's interim budget. The second aspect is with respect to the schemes mentioned in the budget speech. And third aspect is with respect to important agricultural statistics. Please do understand, we do not have the latest statistics at the end of 2023. Right now we have the statistics until the end of 2022, and that should serve the purpose as far as your prelims examination is concerned. Next theme is infrastructure development, and as you can see in this particular theme of infrastructure development, the source would be the interim budget as well as the report published by the Ministry of Finance. It has two parts: announcement in the interim budget as well as schemes mentioned in the budget speech. So in this particular discussion of ours, I shall be covering these three aspects, that is overview of the economy, agriculture theme as well as the theme of infrastructure. As far as the remaining themes are concerned, remaining themes which basically include the theme of inclusive growth and development, the theme of sustainable development, as well as the theme of external sector. I shall be covering the remaining three themes in the next week. So next week, same time, we'll be meeting once again to cover the third and the last aspects of the interim budget. So what we'll do now is we will start with the first aspect of the interim budget, that is the basic overview of the Indian economy. But before that, let me just tell you what all aspects we'll be covering here. One, we will be looking at the growth of Indian economy since 1950 to until now, and what are the future prospects of the economy. That is the first aspect. The second aspect is the important trends, which obviously becomes important as far as your prelims examination is concerned. The third aspect is some important terms from the document published by the Ministry of Finance, and these terms could well become quite important for your upcoming prelims examination. What terms? You can see here friendshoring, nearshoring, reshoring as well as offshoring. These are some of the terms that we will be covering. And as I have been doing it in the last week, analysis also, and then this analysis also, when I'm going to cover these aspects, I have integrated these aspects with the prelims based MCQs as well. Further, these things would also become important from the perspective of your mains. For example, in mains 2021, you had this particular question: do you agree that the Indian economy has recently experienced V-shaped recovery? Give reasons in support of your answer. I hope everyone knows a basic background about V-shaped economic recovery. So Indian economy faced recession during COVID-19, and then it had a very strong rebound after the COVID year. So if you look at our GDP growth rate before and after COVID, it fell like this and then it increased, thus showing a V-shaped recovery. So government obviously said that Indian economy showed V-shaped recovery, but some economists said it is not V-shaped. Some economists said that it is K-shaped. Some people said it is W-shaped. So because it was in news, this aspect was asked. And why am I linking it to budget and economic survey? The simple reason being, the economic survey of that particular year highlighted that Indian economy has indeed shown a V-shaped economic recovery. So when you're writing an answer in support of V-shaped economic recovery, from where will you get the points? You'll obviously get the points directly from the economic survey. Based upon that, if you see, you can get a mains-based question for practice, like enumerate various reforms taken by the government in the last decade to boost the GDP growth. what are the challenges before India in becoming a $7 trillion economy? So keeping this in mind, let us start the discussion of the basic overview of the economy. Let's look at the questions which have been asked in previous year prelims. This is the question which was asked in prelims 2022. Which of the following activities constitute the real sector in the economy? Now, based upon this question, what can you understand? So, based upon this question, we can understand that UPSC might ask you some conceptual questions about GDP. For example, it might ask you questions about nominal GDP, real GDP, what all activities are included in the calculation of GDP, right? So these aspects could be asked in your prelims examination. Look at this question. Now this question had appeared in prelims 2019. As you can see, the question is about purchasing power parity, the conceptual part about purchasing power parity, as well as what is India's ranking in purchasing power parity. So obviously, based upon this question, what can you understand? So UPSC can very well ask you about important trends. Important trends such as what is India's ranking in terms of nominal GDP, what is India's ranking in terms of purchasing power parity, what is India's ranking in terms of GDP growth rate at an international level. So this is how, based upon the analysis of the previous year questions, we can actually know what questions to expect in the upcoming prelims examination. You can see here the question asked in 2017. This is with respect to important trends in terms of contribution of different sectors. Same way, you could get a question about the trends in terms of different growth drivers of Indian economy, like drivers such as private final consumption expenditure, investment rates, and so on. And based upon this question, we could get a question about the trends in the GDP growth rate, trends in terms of nominal GDP growth rate as well as the real GDP growth rate. So what I have basically made you understand is what were the questions asked in the previous year prelims with respect to the topic of GDP. So when we are approaching the topic of GDP, we shall keep these things in mind. And once we cover various aspects of GDP, we will obviously solve these practice questions, and we'll also take up some previous year questions as well as the practice questions as well. So let's start with the discussion. The first aspect. Look at the first aspect, the Indian growth story from 1950 to 2014. What is this Indian growth story? We are telling to you about the document published by the Ministry of Finance, which is a review of the Indian economy. In this particular document, the Ministry of Finance has categorized, or it has categorized the entire GDP growth of Indian economy into three different parts. The past, that is India's growth from 1950 to 2014. The growth in the present decade from 2014 to 2024. And what are the future prospects of economy from 2024 to until 2047? That is the time when India has aspired to become a developed economy. So we are going to look into the historical aspects about the growth of Indian economy from 1950 to 2014. Now, why is this important? This is important for a simple reason, that once you understand these aspects, you will be more appreciative of how Indian economy has grown since India's independence to until now. Apart from that, if there is a question in UPSC mains about the growth of Indian economy, you could use some of these points as fodder points while writing an answer. That is how this topic becomes important. So let's start with the first aspect, that is before 1950. Now, you'll be surprised to know that in the year 1700, India contributed almost around 22% of the global GDP. But when India gained independence, that is in 1950s, around that time, India contributed just around 4% of the global GDP. So what is the meaning of contribution to global GDP? So it's like saying in 1700, if at a global level, we used to produce goods worth 100 rupees. Out of that 100 rupees goods, 22 rupees worth goods were actually produced in India. So which clearly shows that India was one of the most dominant economy in 1700. And no wonder India in the ancient times, as you know, it was called as the golden bird or Sone ki Chidiya, as you must have heard of. That was in 1700. But when British occupied India, because of the economic exploitation of India, as it is referred to as the drain of wealth, India's contribution to the global GDP actually got reduced. But what is interesting is during this time, the contribution of British economy to the global GDP increased. In what way? Let me just give you a simple point. For example, in 1700, British economy contributed just 3% to the global GDP. So go back to 1700. In 1700, India contributed 22% to global GDP, but British contributed just 3% to global GDP. So that way, who was more rich, who was more prosperous, who was more wealthy? India. That is in 1700. But by 1870, the British contribution, the economy's contribution to global GDP tripled to 9%, from 3 to 9%. What does it show? It clearly shows that the British economy grew at the expense of the Indian economy. So, when the share of British economy to the global GDP increased, the share of Indian economy to the global GDP reduced. Right? So, this is one aspect which is quite important, which clearly shows that it was the British exploitative policies which led to the fall in India's GDP. Taking this point forward, so India's share, as you can see in the global income, reduced from 22 to 4% in 1950. So when India gained independence, there was large-scale poverty, underdevelopment. So I hope all of you must be knowing, during that time, we launched 5-year plans. The first 5-year plan was from 1951 to 1956, where we focused on the agriculture sector. The second 5-year plan was from 1956 to 1961, where we focused upon heavy industrialization. And I'm pretty sure most of you must be knowing the second 5-year plan was based upon the Mahalanobis model, right, which focused on import substitution and development of domestic manufacturing. So, in the first decade, that is from 1950 to 1960, if you could see, India's growth rate was around 3.9%. This is in the first decade. As we go to the second decade, that is from 1960 to 1970, let's see what happened. In the second decade, that is from 1960 to 1970, India faced triple shocks. What is this triple shock? Triple shock in the form of the Indo-China War, Indo-Pakistan War, as well as the famine in 1965-66. Because of this triple shock, Indian economy's GDP growth rate did not increase to its potential level. So that was in the second decade. If you see the third decade, in the third decade, that is 1970 to 1980, this was a time of political turmoil in the Indian economy because of the fact of the promulgation of emergency as well as the global oil shocks during this particular time. So that is why, can you see the fall in India's GDP growth rate during this time? And after that, if you go to the next decade, 1980 to 1990, what happened during this particular phase? We all know that India adopted LPG reforms in 1991. But you must understand that even before 1991, on a very slow, gradual and incremental manner, India had already started adopting the pro-business or pro-private policies in this decade of 1980 to 1990. For example, we sought to bring about reforms in our PSUs to increase their performance. So, slow and gradual approach towards pro-business, pro-private policies enabled Indian economy to register a higher GDP growth rate. And then what happened? In the next decade, that is at the time of 1991, I hope everyone knows that India faced BOP crisis. As part of BOP crisis, we all know that India did not had sufficient amount of forex reserves to pay for its imports. And that is when India approached IMF for the loans. But IMF gave us loans with a condition to adopt LPG reforms. So in a way, India adopted full-fledged LPG reforms after 1991. And as you can see, in this particular decade, 1990 to 2000, our GDP growth rate increased further to 5.8. It being said that the growth of the Indian economy until 1990s, until this time, it was referred to as Hindu rate of growth. So Hindu rate of growth is a term which was coined by an economist called as Raj Krishna in 1970s, and which basically means slow growth of Indian economy before the 1991 reforms. So the slow growth of Indian economy before 1991 is only called as the Hindu rate of growth. Consequent to the LPG reforms, as you can see, the Indian economy has continued to register higher growth rate because of its integration with the global economy. So this is the brief overview of the Indian economy in different decades, right from 1950s to 2010. Now this is what is mentioned in the document published by the Ministry of Finance. Taking this forward, let's move to the next part. That is, what is the present status of Indian economy? Now, if you see, this entire circle represents the global GDP. And can you see what is the size of the global GDP? It is $105 trillion. That is the size of the global GDP. And no wonder, if you see in this particular figure, the country which has the largest GDP is USA. US is followed by China. China is followed by Japan. Japan is followed by Germany. And then after Germany, it is India with a GDP size of $3.7 trillion. So, as you can see here, India's GDP, if you rank different countries in terms of GDP, India is placed at $3.7 trillion. And it is like fifth largest economy in the world. Why is it important? Remember, I showed you a question about purchasing power parity. In that particular question, the statement was India ranking in terms of purchasing power parity. Same way, you could get a question about India's ranking in terms of nominal GDP. And India's ranking in terms of nominal GDP is almost around 5th position. You can see top 5 countries in terms of nominal GDP size: US, China, Japan, Germany, and India. So this is the first aspect. The second aspect is, what is India's ranking in terms of purchasing power parity. In terms of purchasing power parity, if you could see here, the first country, the richest country in terms of purchasing power parity is China, followed by US, and then it is India. What is interesting here is in terms of purchasing power parity, China's GDP size is bigger than US. This is what is interesting. Same way, in terms of purchasing power parity, India's GDP size is bigger than that of Japan and Germany. So India is placed at third position. Third aspect, ranking of countries in terms of GDP per capita. Now, what is GDP per capita? GDP per capita is when you divide the GDP of a country divided by its population. Now, when you look at this formula, GDP divided by population, obviously, India's GDP is quite big. Like I showed you here, we are considered to be the 5th largest economy in the world. But at the same time, in terms of population, as you know, India is the world's most populous country. So since it is a ratio, numerator value is big, but the denominator value is much bigger here, population-wise. So when you look at GDP per capita, you must understand India is not counted among the top 5 countries simply because the population of India is quite high. So when you look at the countries in terms of GDP per capita, the topmost countries would be obviously those countries whose population is quite less. The denominator value is quite less, right? So which are these countries? You can see as per the IMF's website, it's an official source. So you might get about random sources on the internet, but this is the official source, which is IMF's website. We can see the top 3 countries in terms of GDP per capita: Luxembourg, Ireland, and Switzerland. Top 3 countries in terms of GDP growth rate. Now, you must have repeatedly heard of this particular statement that Indian economy is the fastest growing economy among the major economies. That is what you normally hear. So the word which is important is among the major economies. This is because when you look at the fastest growing economies at a global level, as per the IMF's website, it is Macau, which is the Macau Special Administrative Region of China, followed by Guyana and Palau. As far as India is concerned, India is the fastest growing economy among the G20 economies. So when you look at all the G20 countries, among all of these G20 countries, in terms of GDP growth rate, the rate at which GDP is growing, India is considered to be the fastest. So these are some important prelims pointers that you should know as far as your prelims examination is concerned. And like I've shown you earlier, that these are some of the things which have already been asked in the previous year UPSC prelims. I hope this part is clear. Look at India's GDP milestones, that is from 1952 until now. Now, like I said, in 1951, India contributed just around 4% of global GDP. And if you see, Indian economy went on to become $1 trillion economy only in the year 2007-8. What does it mean? It basically means that it took us almost 60 years since our independence. Since independence, it took almost 60 years for India to become $1 trillion economy. Now, if I could ask you, if it has taken 60 years for India to become $1 trillion economy, from $1 trillion economy to become $2 trillion economy, how many years it could have taken for India? You'll be surprised to know that from $1 trillion economy, Indian economy has gone on to become $2 trillion in just, can you see how many years? 7 years. 2007 to 2014. Just 7 years, India went on to double its GDP size. From $2 trillion in 2014-15, Indian economy went on to become $3 trillion economy in the year 2021. Can you see here how many more years did it take? 7 more years. So it took 60 years for India to become $1 trillion economy, and from $1 trillion economy, it went on to become $3 trillion economy in just 14 years. That shows the rapid GDP growth of the Indian economy. And now, from $3 trillion economy, I hope most of you must be knowing, we have set a target to achieve $5 trillion economy by the end of 2025. We obviously would have met that particular target to become $5 trillion economy by 2025 had it been not for COVID-19 pandemic. In spite of COVID-19 pandemic, it is now being said India could go on to become $5 trillion economy by 2026-27. So there is a slight delay as far as meeting our target of $5 trillion economy is concerned, but this slight delay is on account of COVID-19 pandemic. So once we reach $5 trillion economy by end of 2026-27, we have to target the next frontier. And what would be the next frontier be? The monthly review of the Ministry of Finance said once we reach the $5 trillion economy, we need to target the next frontier, which is to become $7 trillion economy by the end of 29-30. This is our next target. $7 trillion economy. And we all know that government has kept an ambitious target to become developed country or Viksit Bharat by the time India celebrates 100 years of India's independence. So it is being said, if India has to become a developed country by end of 2047, our GDP size should increase to $30 trillion. This is how, as you can see, India's GDP milestones have gone on to be. So now, there are two targets before us. First target is in the medium run, India aspires to become $7 trillion economy by 29-30. And in the long run, our target is to become a developed country wherein our GDP size should be somewhere around $30 trillion. That is what we are aspiring for. So having understood this aspect, let's look at the India's growth, especially in the last 1 decade. In the last 1 decade, the document has highlighted that Indian economy, from being the 10th largest economy in the world, has gone on to become the 5th largest economy in the world. So this has happened in just last 10 years. That is from 2014 to 2024. Apart from that, in last 3 to 4 years, except the COVID pandemic, broadly, we have been able to register a GDP growth rate of 7%. And this is in spite of the triple shocks to the Indian economy. What was the triple shocks? These triple shocks to the Indian economy was number 1, COVID-19, number 2, the Russia-Ukraine war, and number 3, the synchronized rate hikes by the central banks in the developed economies. So because of these 3 reasons, triple shocks, the Indian economy has still, in spite of these triple shocks, Indian economy has still registered a higher GDP growth rate, which clearly shows the strength and resilience of the Indian economy. So based upon this, you should know what are the important steps. What are the important steps or the key drivers of the Indian economy? What steps the government has taken here? So when you see the steps taken by the government, what you should think of is, you should think of your different pillars of your syllabus, like banking, taxation, manufacturing, external sector, inclusive growth and development, and so on. And within each of these pillars, you should think of some important steps taken by the government in the last one decade. Now, why is it important? Now, these things, that is, what are the key growth drivers of the Indian economy, could be very well asked in the UPSC mains. And if someone is going for the interview, there could well be a question about what are the important steps taken by the government in the last 10 years, and among those important steps, which step of the government has been able to bring about a dramatic turnaround in the Indian economy. This is the kind of question which you can get. So based upon that, let's quickly have a look at the important growth drivers. Can anyone tell me what important steps has the government taken as far as banking is concerned? Anyone? With respect to banking, any major step which you can think of? With respect to banking? In the last 10 years. Abhishek says IBC 2016. Very good, Abhishek. Anything else which you are able to recall with respect to banking? FRBM 2003. Banking, you should say. NPA, bad banks, good Nitesh. Bad bank were set up in the form of NARCL. Anything else apart from IBC? Yes, good Shashank. Recapitalization. Universal banking, good Anisha. Jandan. Prompt corrective action, good. Reduction of NPA, good. So there are obviously a number of points you can see here. Broadly, this is what has been mentioned. Number one is with respect to consolidation of public sector banks as well as recapitalization of public sector banks. You must understand both consolidation and recapitalization has taken place on the recommendations of PJ Nayak committee. We have implemented IBC code, we have set up bad bank, and we have also set up a development bank in the form of NAFID. Apart from that, if you see taxation wise, with respect to taxation, we have introduced some major reforms like GST, a major indirect tax reform which has subsumed multiple indirect taxes in order to create the idea of one nation, one tax. We have reduced our corporate tax in order to encourage more foreign companies to set up their base in India so as to provide a fillip to the domestic manufacturing. We have simplified the tax regime. With respect to infrastructure, I'm pretty sure most of you must have heard about, we have launched National Investment Pipeline, National Infrastructure Pipeline, National Monetization Pipeline, Gati Shakti, Sagarmala, Bharatmala, Udan, and so on. With respect to manufacturing, we have changed the definition of micro, small, and medium enterprises. We have launched Make in India. We have provided for PLI scheme. With respect to external sector, most of you must be knowing, we have launched the Foreign Trade Policy 2023, which has come into being from April 1st, 2023. Then we have come up with ROTTEP scheme. We have signed more FTAs in order to have much global integration. We have liberalized the FDI norms in most of the sectors, including the defense sector. We have sought to promote inclusive growth by adopting measures such as JAM Trinity, Ayushman Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, and so on. These are the broad points which you could very well incorporate while writing an answer in the UPSC mains. And if you are attending interview, you could highlight all of these steps which the government has taken in order to ensure that India becomes Viksit Bharat or developed country by 2047. So these are some of the things which you can very well incorporate. Now based upon that, let's look at the important prelims pointers now. This shows the trends in the real and nominal GDP. Please understand, this is trend in terms of absolute size of GDP. It is not in terms of GDP growth rate. and I'm pretty sure most of you know what is nominal GDP as well as what is real GDP. For the sake of quick revision, for the benefit of all the students, we know nominal GDP is when we measure GDP at current prices. And how do you measure that nominal GDP? By taking into account the quantity of goods produced in current year and multiplying that quantity with the prices of the goods and services in the current year. So that is why it is called as GDP at current prices. Same way, you have real GDP, and real GDP is GDP at constant prices, or it is also referred to as GDP at base year prices, where prices remain constant. And this real GDP is measured as quantity in the current year into prices of goods and services not in the current year, but we will take into account the base year. And right now the base year happens to be 2011-12. Now for example, I would want to measure the GDP for the year 2023, and let's say we are producing only apples and nothing else. In the year 2023, let's say we have produced 10 apples and the price of the apple in the year 2023 was 10. So my nominal GDP in this particular case will be 10 into 10, that is rupees 100. On the other hand, I can also look at the price of the apple in the year 2011-12. Let's say it was rupees 5. So that way, if I want to calculate real GDP is quantity in the current year, which is 10, into price in the base year, that is 5, which is 50. Okay, now we can just quickly have a look at the trends in the nominal GDP. Can you see the nominal GDP size in the year 23-24? It is 296 lakh crore, which is the present size of the nominal GDP. And please observe the trend in the nominal GDP size in the last 6 years. Can you see broadly the nominal GDP which is shown in the blue? This has shown a steady increase except during 1 year, which is that year during this 2020-21, where nominal GDP actually declined. And no wonder 2020-21 was actually the COVID year. Apart from this, look at the real GDP. Our real GDP size in 23-24 is 171 lakh crore. From this, please observe the trend in the real GDP. Can you see the real GDP has steadily increased in the last 6 years, barring the COVID year, when the real GDP also declined by 10 lakh crore. So what should you know as far as this thing is concerned? Number one, nominal GDP in terms of absolute value has registered a steady increase except during COVID. Real GDP has also registered a steady increase except during COVID. And third aspect, both nominal GDP as well as real GDP declined during the COVID year. Now this is one aspect about the nominal GDP. Please remember this thing. Now this is trends in real and nominal GDP growth rate. Please understand the difference. First, in the last slide, I had shown you trends in the absolute size of nominal GDP and real GDP. This is the trends with respect to GDP growth rate. At what rate this is the nominal GDP and real GDP growing. And please concentrate on the blue color. The nominal GDP growth rate in India in the year 23-24 is 8.9%. But observe the trend. Are you able to see any particular trend, that is consistent increase or consistent decrease? There is no particular trend that you can observe, which I would say is good for you. because there's nothing to be remembered as far as the trends in the nominal GDP growth rate is concerned. In some years, nominal GDP growth rate has reduced, and in some years it has increased. Same, concentrate on the real GDP growth rate. The real GDP growth rate in the year 23-24 was 7.3%. And can you see the real GDP growth rate in the last 5 years? There is no observable trend in terms of real GDP growth rate. Some years it has reduced, it has increased and then further reduced. There is no observable trend. So the two most important things, one, nominal GDP growth rate, fluctuating trend. Second, real GDP growth rate, fluctuating trend. And third aspect, look what happened to nominal GDP growth rate and real GDP growth rate during the COVID year. Both nominal GDP growth rate and real GDP growth rate registered negative GDP growth rate. It means there was a fall in the absolute size of nominal GDP as well as real GDP. This is what you must understand as far as the trends is concerned. So based upon that, let's take up some practice questions. Some practice questions here. सबसे पहले we'll start with the previous year prelims question asked in prelims 2022. The question is, which of the following constitutes the real sector in the economy? So what is the real sector? In most simplest of the words, real sector is where actual production of goods and services take place. So if you see any economic activity where actual production of goods and services is taking place, we can call it as real sector. Take for example, a farmer is harvesting his crops. It is the real sector. A industry is manufacturing mobile phones. Real sector. I'm standing here, I'm offering you services. It is a real sector. So wherever there's actual production of goods and services take place, that is a real sector. Anything else where actual production of goods and services does not take place, that is the money flow. Example, wholesaler is selling the agriculture commodities to a retailer. When wholesaler sells agriculture commodities to a retailer, you must understand that is not real sector because there is no production involved. There is just transaction taking place. So I'll call that as money flow. A bank giving loans to a corporate entity. There is no actual production. So that is why it will be considered as money flow. So that way, if you could see here, which of the following constitutes the real sector? I can see most of you have given the right answer. The right answer is 1 and 2, which is farmers harvesting their crops and textile mills converting raw cotton into fabrics, which is good. Keeping this in mind, let's take a practice question. Please have a look at the practice question, all of you. Let's see how many of you will be able to get the right answer. Consider the following. Foreign company based in India exporting goods to USA. Farmer producing rice for self-consumption. Air India operating international flights. Production of goods by SEZ units. How many of the above would be included in the calculation of GDP in India? Let's see how many will be able to get the right answer to this. Only 2. Sahil, Gaurav, Pranjal says answer is B. That is only 2. What about others? Piyush, Anisha, B. Sakshi says B. Okay, let's try to understand what it is. Now this is something which is tricky, and you know this is how UPSC formulates its questions, where we are actually confused what gets included in GDP and what does not get included in the GDP. And that is what we are going to cover here. Now, let's try to understand, when we measure GDP, what is the most important factor that has to be taken into consideration? To understand what is included and what is excluded for the calculation of GDP, you need to understand the concept of economic territory. What is this economic territory? All the goods and services which are produced in India's economic territory will be added to our GDP. And when I'm saying economic territory, you should know what is economic territory. Let's try to understand this. What is the meaning of economic territory? Please have a look at this. Economic territory. So here, what all goods, what all services are produced in our economic territory, all that goods and services, irrespective of who has provided those goods and services, will get included in our GDP. So you can see what is part of our economic territory. Economic territory means it provides for free flow of goods and services. And what does it include? Number one, it includes our political territory. Number two, it includes territorial water and our air spaces, embassies and military bases of India in other countries. Take for example, you have Indian embassy in USA. This Indian embassy in USA, physically it is not located in India. It is physically located in USA, yet it is considered to be part of India's economic territory. Please understand that. Same way, look at this. This is very interesting. Ships and aircraft operated by Indian residents. When I'm saying Indian residents, it means a company which is incorporated in India, a company which is based in India. Take for example, Air India. Air India is based in India. And Air India, let's say, is offering some international flights. The international flight is, let's say, operating between Paris to New York. Now, question is, will that be considered part of India's GDP? Yes, indeed. It will be considered as part of India's GDP. Why? Because this ship, which is operated by this aircraft, this aircraft, which is operated by Air India, this aircraft itself is our economic territory. So that is why, the international flights operated by Air India is part of our economic territory. The same can be said about the ships operated by Indian residents. Fishing vessels and oil and gas rigs operated by residents in international waters and exclusive economic zone. And look at the last part. Last part says units based in SEZ or international financial centers. So if you have unit in special economic zone or a international financial service center like Gift City, which is based in Gujarat, all that is still part of our GDP. What gets excluded then? Embassies and military bases of other countries in India, which is quite natural, don't you think? If Indian embassy in US is part of India's economic territory, US embassy based in India will be part of whose economic territory? US economic territory, not India's economic territory. Same way, international organizations based in India are not part of our economic territory. So, when you go back to the question which was asked here, you can just see foreign company based in India exporting goods to US. Obviously, it gets included in our GDP. Air India operating international flights, it gets included in our GDP. Production of goods by SEZ units is also part of our GDP. What about the goods which are, produced for self-consumption? Like farmer is producing rice for self-consumption. And this is something which is interesting. You must understand that all the goods which are produced for self-consumption also gets included in the GDP. Now, this is something which is interesting. So, whether the goods are marketable, that is sold in the market, or the goods are non-marketable, they will always be part of GDP. Please understand that this is something which is tricky. So, that way, this is correct. So, right answer is all the four. But there is another important aspect which I want to tell you here. When you see goods can be marketable and non-marketable. And like I said, marketable means that you sell the goods in the market and you get money for this. Non-marketable means you are producing goods for your self-consumption. Both marketable goods and non-marketable goods are included in the GDP calculation. As far as services are concerned, services can also be categorized into marketable services and non-marketable services. Marketable service means you provide for a service for which you get paid. Non-marketable service means you provide for a service but you don't get paid for it. That is non-marketable. Take for example, like marketable service, a service of a IT engineer, a service of a domestic worker. All of that is actually included in the GDP. What is non-marketable? The best example is contribution of homemakers. So when the homemakers are actually contributing to the economy, can I say that they're not getting paid for it? It is non-marketable service. So because of which the non-marketable service is not part of our GDP. Can you observe here? Marketable goods and non-marketable goods, both are included in GDP. But when it comes to services, only marketable services are included, non-marketable services are not included. This is the most important part. Please do remember this thing, which can be very tricky as far as your exam is concerned. I hope this part is clear, right? So let's look at the question. I hope you should be able to answer this question. This is a practice question for you. It's pretty easy. Based upon what I have covered, you should be able to answer this. Look at this question. Can anyone answer this? Which among the following best describes the difference between recession and deflation? Please have a look at the point. Recession and deflation के बीच में क्या difference है? Now this is something which is, I guess, most confusing for most of you, where you tend to see both deflation and recession as one, but you must understand there's a minute difference between deflation and recession. Let's see how many of you will be able to get the right answer to this question. Yes. Okay, I can see most of you are giving the answer as B. Fine. Let's see whether correct answer is B or not. Okay, let's try to get to know this point. सबसे पहले, what is deflation? Deflation means there is decrease in prices of goods and services. Prices of goods and services has got reduced such that the rate of inflation, because the price of goods and services has got reduced, the rate of inflation is negative. Example, 2022 price of a particular commodity was 100. 2023 price of this particular commodity has dropped to 50. Can you see there is decrease in prices by 50 rupees? And if I calculate the rate of inflation, it has got reduced by 50%. So there is this negative rate of inflation. So when I say deflation, deflation is limited to fall in the prices such that the rate of inflation becomes negative. What is recession then? Recession means there is decrease in absolute size of GDP such that the GDP growth rate is negative. So can you see the first difference here? when we say deflation is more confined to only the prices. Recession is not with respect to prices, it is much broader, it is more comprehensive, where we are saying there is fall in the GDP growth rate itself. Example, let's say GDP in the year 2022, 2023 and 2024. Now let's say it is like 100. From 100 it goes on to become 200. So can you see here there is a positive GDP growth rate, but let's say from 200 it goes on to become 100. So if you observe this, there is decrease in the absolute size of GDP, right? And what is the GDP growth rate? The GDP growth rate here is negative. So if you, when you look at the question now, what do you think is the right answer? B or D? Yes, answer is B or D. Please have a look at the answer D. Yes. What is the main difference? Recession refers to decrease in the GDP growth rate, while deflation refers to fall in the prices. See, I would say but both B and D are in a way correct. But between these two, you have to choose which is more appropriate. What is more appropriate? Any day, can I say D is more appropriate? The only reason why I would say D is more appropriate because B says that there is decrease in GDP growth rate. Decrease in GDP growth rate does not necessarily mean recession. Decrease in GDP growth rate would more means slowdown, right? So that is why the right answer is D. I hope we are clear with this. Taking this, let's look at the next question. Let's see how many of you will be able to get the right answer to this. An increase in nominal GDP size accompanied by constant level of real GDP size would indicate which among the following? Monish, I said absolute size of GDP. Absolute size of GDP means that the size of GDP, as you can see, has got decreased from 200 to 100. When I'm saying decrease in absolute size of GDP, or I can also write this as recession refers to negative GDP growth rate. Both are correct. Yeah, I can see most of you are giving me the right answer for practice MCQ number 4. So it says that real GDP has remained same. So when I'm saying real GDP, I told you real GDP is quantity of the current year into prices of the base year. If real GDP has remained same, it means the quantity of goods produced in this year and the next year are same. That means that we are not increase our GDP size in terms of real GDP. Increase in nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is quantity of the current year into prices of the current year. Now when I say that real GDP has remained same, the quantity has remained same. Quantity. What has got changed is the prices. So right answer here is C. Good. All of you have given the answer as C. Good. I hope everyone is clear with this. Kanha, like I said, B and D, I told you very clearly, B and D, which is more appropriate. Any day, D is more appropriate because D says decrease in the absolute size of GDP, not just decrease in GDP growth rate. I've explained in so much of detailed aspects. And in case if you have any doubts, you can always stay back after the class. I'll discuss that. Okay. Look at this. What do you think is the answer? Practice MCQ number 5. All of you quickly. Which among the following is, let me just tell you, is incorrect with respect to nominal and real GDP. Increase in real GDP indicates increase in production of goods and services. Increase in nominal GDP may indicate increase in both production and prices. It says may. Decrease in inflation rate may lead to decrease in nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is always higher than the real GDP. Yes, what do you think? Is nominal GDP always higher than real GDP? Not always, right? I told you nominal GDP is the quantity in the current year into prices in current year. What would happen if the prices in current year have declined? If the prices in the current year have got declined, then obviously there could be a possibility where nominal GDP is lower than the real GDP. The prices in the current year is lower than the prices in the base year. This could be possibility. So the incorrect is C. Look at the next one. Consider the following statements. Recession refers to negative real GDP growth rate for 2 consecutive quarters in a year. Both nominal GDP and real GDP registered negative GDP growth rate in 2021 due to pandemic. India faced recession for the first time since 1991 reforms in COVID or during the COVID year. So when you see recession refers to negative real GDP growth rate for 2 consecutive quarters, it is correct. For 2 consecutive quarters, if there is negative GDP growth rate, then it is called as actual recession. So there is a definition of recession. For 2 consecutive quarters, the GDP growth rate should be negative. Both nominal GDP and real GDP registered negative GDP growth rate in 2021 due to pandemic, correct? India faced recession for the first time since 1991 reforms. What do you think? During COVID, did we face a recession for the first time in 1991? It is actually correct. India faced recession for the first time since 1991 reforms during COVID-19. When I say recession, technically recession means that real GDP growth rate was negative for 2 consecutive quarters. Prior to this, we faced recession in 1970s. So the right answer in this case is all the 3. All the 3 is the right answer. Okay, now coming to the next part. It is 2 consecutive quarters. For 2 consecutive quarters, if it is GDP is falling, then it is negative recession. Percentage contribution of major drivers of Indian economy. I hope you must be knowing when we measure the GDP by expenditure method, there are 4 major drivers of Indian economy. Number 1, the private final consumption expenditure. Number 2, gross capital formation. Number 3, government final consumption expenditure and net exports. And when we say net exports is actually written as export minus imports. These are our 4 major drivers. And when you look at these 4 major drivers, the major driver of Indian economy is private final consumption expenditure, which is the basic demand. And then followed by gross capital formation. And then we have government final consumption expenditure. When you see net export, which is export minus import, this is actually equal to minus 2%. Minus 2%. So you can see this is how we have the contribution of different drivers of the Indian economy. So Private final consumption expenditure accounts for the highest share. Net exports for India is negative. But there is another concept which is called as trade to GDP ratio. What is trade to GDP ratio? Trade to GDP ratio is calculated as exports plus imports. You have to add the exports and imports. That is when you get the trade to GDP ratio. Can you see the fundamental difference? When I say net export, it is export minus import. This is net export. But if we want to calculate trade to GDP ratio, trade to GDP ratio is total value of exports plus total value of imports. That is the basic difference. So net exports, like I said, it is minus 2%, but trade to GDP ratio is 21 plus 1, which is almost around 45 to 46%. That is our trade to GDP ratio. And you must understand one thing, that this trade to GDP ratio of India, this is actually higher than China. The same has been highlighted by Economic Survey almost 2 to 3 years back. Why is trade to GDP ratio of India higher than China? Because you must understand, we are expressing this trade as percentage of GDP. So it's like trade divided by GDP. So here the denominator for India is less. That is why the trade to GDP ratio is more than that of China. For China, the denominator value is higher. That is why its trade to GDP ratio is lower. This is what you must understand. So keeping that as a background, let's see here trends in the private final consumption expenditure. This can be important from the perspective of your prelims. So overall, if you look at the trends in the private final consumption expenditure, in last 8 years, if you see, in last 8 years, the PFC's contribution to India's GDP was somewhere around 58 to 60%. But in last 4 years, it has increased to almost around 60%. And it is considered to be the major driver of the Indian economy. That is what you must understand. So share of private final consumption expenditure has increased from an average of 58% in the last 8 years to 60% in the last 3 years. This is one point. As far as what is included in the private final consumption expenditure, what is not included in the private final consumption expenditure, this is what I have incorporated in this particular mind map. This is more so important from the static part of the economy. Now, if I go into these aspects, it will take a lot of time for me. I just incorporated this in the PPT. I hope you should be able to go through these things about private final consumption expenditure. Coming to next aspect, the next aspect is with respect to trends in the investment rate. Now, what is investment rate? As you can see, investment rate as highlighted by the finance ministry, investment rate is the ratio of gross fixed capital formation, GFCF, over the nominal GDP. So it is like gross fixed capital formation divided by nominal GDP. This gives us the investment rate in the economy. And this particular graph shows the overall trends in the investment rate right from 2005 to until 2023. Now, can you just see the investment rate from the year 2005 to 2007-8? There was large scale increase in the investment rate in the Indian economy. Why did the investment rate increase? This is because during this particular phase, there was increase in the GDP growth. India was phenomenally growing at a very high GDP growth rate, which made the banks over optimistic with respect to GDP. The over optimism of the bank led to more credit creation. banks started giving more amount of loans to the companies so that the companies can make more amount of investment and thus increase the GDP. So because of the over optimism by the banks, there was large scale increase in this particular GDP investment rate. And this large scale increase in investment rate, can you see, it was because of credit boom. Boom, as the name suggests, sudden increase in the overall credit creation in the Indian economy. So everything was going on fine until 2007-8. But we all know what happened in 2007-8. The global financial crisis. So because of the global financial crisis, the entire thing started crashing down. So after 2007-8, our GDP growth rate actually got started reducing. And as the GDP growth rate started reducing, obviously the profits of the companies started reducing. The companies were not in a position to repay the loans which they had taken. Consequent to which, during 2008 to 2012-13, during this time, the NPAs of the banks started increasing gradually. And we all know that when the NPAs of the banks start increasing, banks turn, they stop or they start giving less amount of loans because of the fear that the loans might turn into non-performing assets. So the amount of credit creation in the economy started reducing because of the risk aversion of the banks, where the banks were reluctant in giving loans. So that is why, can you see what happened to the investment rate in the economy after the 2008 financial crisis? There was large scale fall in the investment rate in the economy. But then we know that we have started addressing the problem of NPAs in the economy. Recently, it has been highlighted that the NPAs of the Indian banks have declined to its lowest level in last 5 to 6 years. So because the NPAs have got reduced, banks are in a position to give more amount of loans. And as they have started giving more amount of loans, now can you see slowly the investment is picking up. So this is a phase of growth and investment recovery which has taken place in the last 3 to 4 years. Now this is the overall trend in the investment rate. What kind of questions will be asked from the topic that we have covered? Let's have a look through some practice MCQs. Then we'll get more clarity on that. And please have a look at this point. This is something which is interesting. Share of private sector in the overall investment is higher than the investment by the public sector. And I'm saying public sector. Public sector investment includes investment by the center, investment by the states, and investment by the PSUs owned by the government. So investment by center, state and PSUs together is called as public sector investment, and that investment is lower than the private sector investment. This is something which is interesting. So when I'm saying that investment is around 30% right now, majority of this investment is from private sector. Amount of public sector investment is quite less. Now this is interesting. Please remember this point. So let's have a look at the points. Okay. When I say gross capital formation, this is once again very static foundation. Please understand, gross capital formation, GCF, will include number 1, gross fixed capital formation, changes in inventories and valuables. So when I'm saying investment, for investment we are not taking into account entire gross capital formation, GCF. For investment we are taking into account only the gross fixed capital formation. That is what I wanted to highlight, which includes creation of assets, spending on machinery and equipment, expenditure on research and development, and cultivated biological resources. All of this constitutes the gross fixed capital formation. I have discussed these things in much greater detail in the previous year's union budget, last year's union budget. We can go to that point if you want to know more about this thing. Please have a look at the practice MCQ number 7. Quickly let me know the answer to this. Consider the following drivers of GDP in India. Which among the following correctly denotes the ascending order of the contribution of these components to India's GDP? Quickly. What do you think is the answer? Before you answer and before you get confused, let me tell you, I have asked the ascending order of the contribution. And you know what ascending order is? From lowest to highest. Okay. So if I want to arrange them in lowest to highest, 4, 3, 2, 1. Net exports, government final consumption expenditure, gross capital formation, and PFC. Good. All of you have given the answer as C. Good. Look at this. Look at this question. Practice MCQ number 8. Which among the following best describes the trade to GDP ratio of a country? Okay, if you've not been able to see the last option is total imports and exports of goods and services expressed as percentage of GDP. Total export of goods and service, imports and export of goods and services expressed as percentage of GDP. Yes, good. Good. Answer here is D. That is trade to GDP ratio. Look at this question, all of you. Consider the following statements related to investment rate in India. Investment rate. And you require to find out how many statements given above are correct. The investment rate is calculated as gross fixed capital formation as percentage of nominal GDP. The investment rate has steadily increased in the last decade, barring the pandemic year. The share of private sector investment is higher than the public sector investment. What do you think? How many are correct? Investment is calculated as gross fixed capital formation as a percentage of nominal GDP, correct? Share of private sector investment is higher than the public sector investment. Look at the second one. Investment rate has steadily increased in the last decade, barring the pandemic year. No, I told you that investment was actually reducing much before the pandemic, right? In fact, after the pandemic, it has increased. So that way, it is incorrect. And the right answer here is only 2. Good. All of you again, the answer is 2 only. Very good. Look at this. Let's see how many of you will be able to answer this. Consider the following. Loans to the farmers for growing crops. Loans to the corporates for undertaking business expansion. Loans to the FCI for undertaking procurement of crops. How many of the above are included in the non-food credit in India? Let me tell you why it is important. It is important because the document published by the Finance Ministry has clearly highlighted that in last 2 to 3 years, there has been large scale increase in the non-food credit given by the banks. Because it has been highlighted by the Finance Ministry, what aspect could become important in UPSC prelims? This aspect, where they can ask you what is included in the non-food credit. Okay, now what is non-food credit? Let me tell you. For that, you need to understand what is food credit. Food credit is the loans which the banks give to FCI for undertaking procurement of crops. This is the meaning of food credit. So whenever the banks give loans to FCI to purchase or undertake procurement of crops at MSP, that is food credit. And let me tell you, except this, everything else is non-food credit, including the loans which the banks give to farmers for growing of crops. So only one thing is food credit. That is the loans which the banks give to FCI for procurement of crops. Only that is food credit. Everything else is non-food credit. So that way, when I say non-food credit, it will include 1 and 2. The right answer is only 2. I hope you understood. And I told you why is it important? Because of the simple reason that the finance ministry has highlighted that the non-food credit has registered a large scale increase. That is why it is important. Now coming to the last part. Last part here is some important terms related to globalization and deglobalization as highlighted by the finance ministry document. Now, there is a concept of global value chain. What is global value chain? Global value chain is an international production sharing mechanism where different countries contribute to the production of a particular product based upon their area of expertise or area of specialization. Which means if you want to manufacture one single product, that single product is not manufactured by a single country. Rather, different countries contribute to the manufacture of the product based upon their area of expertise. That is global value chain. The best example of global value chain is the Apple supply chain. So when you look at the Apple iPhone, the research and development for Apple iPhone takes place in US. The supply of critical components used in Apple iPhone, such as semiconductor chips, it is done by countries such as Taiwan, Japan, to a certain extent Germany. But the final assembly is done in China. So can you see different countries are contributing to the manufacture of Apple iPhone based upon their area of expertise. That itself is global value chain. Now let me show you that through an example. Can you see the Apple supply chain? Different countries are contributing to the manufacturing of Apple iPhone, which is the global value chain. Now when I say global value chain here, we have seen a rapid growth of global value chain, particularly because of the global economic integration across the countries. Now, based upon this concept of global value chain, we have what is called as the smile curve. What is a smile curve? Smile curve of global value chain shows the extent of value addition across the supply chain. When I say extent of value addition across the supply chain, as you can see, the supply chain actually starts with research and development. And you must see here, when you see research and development, the value addition here, as you can see, the extent of value addition is quite high. But as you go down the lane, that is when you reach the production, amount of value addition at the level of production or assembly is quite less. So this shows the smile curve of GVC. And you can see developed economies are focusing on the activities where higher amount of value addition is required or it is needed. For example, research and development, design. Developing countries are mostly focusing on assembly of critical components. The best case happens to be China. So that is what is global value chain. Now you must understand the significance of global value chain. Significance of global value chain is it has led to a much faster global economic integration. It has in a way able to create jobs where in the developing countries such as China, and not just China, even in countries such as India, Vietnam, Mexico, and so on. So this is what is the smile curve. Based upon this, now let's try to understand the terms related to deglobalization. Okay. Now it is being said the global value chains are now facing a threat because of number one, friendshoring, nearshoring, and onshoring. But to understand friendshoring, nearshoring, and onshoring, सबसे पहले you need to know the basics. The basics here is what is offshoring. When I say offshoring, It simply means that a particular industry moves its supply chain to another country. Take for example, Apple iPhone based in US. This Apple iPhone moves its production line, assembly line to China. Or Tesla moves its assembly or supply line to Tesla, which is a US based company, is moving its supply line to China. This is an example of offshoring. Off means moving away from the country of origin to another country. Now think, why would a company do that? There could be multiple reasons as to why a company might move to another country. Number one, it might get access to raw materials in other country. Number two, it may have access to cheap cost labor in another country. Number three, it might have a much wider market in another country. That is why a company can move to another country. Take for example, Tesla. Tesla has set up one of the biggest factories in China. Now, why would Tesla set up a factory in China? Number one, what do you think is a raw material for Tesla car? Obviously, one of the biggest or the most significant raw material for Tesla car is the electric batteries. And where are the majority of electric batteries manufactured? China. So it can have access to the cheaper batteries in China if it sets up its production unit in China. Second, China has cheap and skilled labor force. Third, China has a much wider market because of its more population. So don't you think it is profitable for Tesla to set up its base in China? Because it can have a higher economies of scale. So that is why a company will shift from one country to another. Now think of it. Can I say, when offshoring takes place, it will benefit the foreign company also and the country in which it establishes its base. How will foreign company get benefited? Foreign company will get benefited because it can earn more profit. Its efficiency will improve. The country in which the foreign company is making investment, that country will also get benefited. How? It will attract more FDI, foreign direct investment. It can create more jobs for its people and at the same time boost its exports to other countries. And don't you think China has been doing the same thing? If you look at the Chinese growth model is based upon attracting FDI, creating jobs for its people, and then exporting goods to other countries. And that is how China has got immensely benefited through offshoring. So the foreign company is getting benefited, the country in which it is making investment is getting benefited, but someone is facing a loss. Who is facing a loss? The country from which the foreign company is relocating its base. For example, in this case, US. Don't you think US economy will get adversely affected here? How will it get adversely affected? Because if Tesla moves its base to China, then Tesla would obviously not make investment in US. It will not be able to increase job creation. It will not be able to boost its GDP, right? So this is one of the biggest problem related to the offshoring. But now one more important problem has taken place with respect to offshoring. Due to the recent COVID-19 pandemic, it has been shown that if you rely on one single country for supply of critical products, then the entire supply chain faces a shock. Example, we all know that China started following zero COVID policy in the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic. Because of zero COVID policy, China to a large extent stopped its manufacturing. When China stopped its manufacturing, don't you think China was not in a position to supply critical materials or critical products to other countries? So when China was not in a position to supply critical products to other countries, don't you think it affected other countries as well? I hope you're getting this point, which means offshoring is making the supply chain extremely vulnerable. It is forcing, or it is in a way making us more dependent on one single country, in this case China. So you can just see here, I have just explained this thing here. Relocation of supply chain to other countries. For example, Tesla's gigafactory in China. Why will Tesla go to China? Availability of raw materials, low skilled workforce, easy access to market. Benefits I have explained. Problems is higher dependence on a country for sourcing of products, leading to supply chain disruptions which we faced during COVID. So what should we do? And that is when countries are coming up with initiatives such as friendshoring, nearshoring, and onshoring. What happens in friendshoring? In friendshoring, the government of a particular country will give incentives to its companies to shift its production from a non-friendly country to a friendly country. I repeat, a government is giving some incentives to a company so that it shifts its location from a non-friendly country to a friendly country. Example, here US can give some incentives to Tesla so that Tesla may shift its production unit away from China into India, or for that matter Vietnam. That is what is friendshoring. How do you think it is getting benefiting US? Just one way it is getting benefited. I told you, we are no longer, in this case US is no longer dependent upon China. It is in a way going or integrating more with the countries with which it has got good relations. I hope it is getting this point, right? So you can see, in case of friendshoring, we are relocating the supply chain from non-friendly to friendly countries. Example, to reduce dependence on non-friendly country. Example, setting up of Apple assembly line in India or Vietnam. This is a classical case of friendshoring. What are some of the global initiatives? I'm pretty sure some of you must have heard about Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. This particular initiative has been started by Japan, India, and Australia. And the basic aspect, basic mandate of this particular initiative is to reduce dependence on China. So it is like friendshoring. It is part of China plus strategy. Same like Supply Chain Resilience Initiative by these countries, the US Parliament has recently passed an act called as US CHIPS Act. What is this US CHIPS Act? Under the US CHIPS Act, the US government is going to give funding support, money, to companies to undertake research and development in manufacturing of semiconductors. But let's say the US government gives funding to US based companies to undertake research and development for manufacturing of semiconductors. They avail the funding of US government, and after availing funding of US government, what if they shift their production base to China? So they avail benefit from US, but they'll benefit China in that way. So how do you stop that? The US government has said, if you get our funding for semiconductor research, you cannot relocate to China. You should manufacture in US only. So this is a classical case of how US is forcing companies from not relocating to China. That is friendshoring. What is nearshoring? Okay, nearshoring and friendshoring are almost same. There is one thing which is common. The common thing here is, under friendshoring and nearshoring, a foreign company is relocating its base. But in friendshoring, a foreign company is relocating its base to a friendly country. However, in case of nearshoring, a foreign company is relocating its base to a neighboring country. For example, here Apple might relocate its base to India. But Apple, which is a US based company, might relocate its base to a neighboring country of US, which is like Mexico or Canada. Same way, Tesla relocating its base towards India or Vietnam, it is friendshoring. But Tesla relocating its base to Mexico, Canada, what it would be? it will be nearshoring. So that is the fundamental difference. So the difference here is where are you relocating? The second difference is the reason for relocation also. If I could tell you the reason for relocation in case of friendshoring, it is more geopolitical in nature. But the reason for relocation in nearshoring is more about geographical aspects, or it is more about reducing the logistic cost. For example, you can see relocation of supply chain to neighboring countries to reduce the logistic cost. Relocation of Tesla from China to Mexico. Example, the US Parliament has passed an act called as Inflation Reduction Act. Under this particular act, the US Parliament has said that all those companies which assemble electric vehicles in North America, companies assembling electric vehicles in North America, they will get tax credit, tax benefit. So, can you see what the US is trying to do? US is in a way giving incentives to Tesla to shift its base from China to Mexico as well as Canada, including US, right? So that is what is nearshoring. The next aspect is onshoring. In case of onshoring, the country is encouraging the relocation of supply chain back to the home country. In this case, relocation of Tesla from China to US, it is onshoring. And rationale why it is done? In order to boost the domestic manufacturing as well as employment. I hope it is self-explanatory. So you can see some of the global initiatives which I have already explained. In US, they passed Inflation Reduction Act to encourage Tesla to come back and start manufacturing or assembling the electric cars in America itself. It has also passed US TIPS Acts to boost the domestic manufacturing of semiconductor chips. So these are some important aspects. So based upon that, let's take up some practice question. Please have a look at the practice MCQ number 11, all of you. Let's see how many of you will be able to rightly answer this question. Which among the following best describes the concept of smile curve sometimes seen in news? I guess it should be easy now. Yeah, it shows the value addition at different stages of value chain. It's pretty easy. Look at this question. Which among the following best describes the concept of friend shoring sometimes seen in news? All of you, please read all the options carefully and you need to choose an option which is most appropriate. The options I have deliberately made as little tough and which almost seem similar. Yeah, good. Good. The right answer is relocation of supply chain of an industry from non-friendly to friendly countries to ensure resilience of supply chain. Compare this A, B, C, D. Compare this with this. Relocation of supply chain of an industry to another country, mostly on the grounds of economic efficiency. Are we taking into account economic efficiency? Not necessarily. Sometimes when you go for friend shoring, their economic efficiency might get adversely affected. In fact, this was a concern raised by ex-RBI Governor Mr. Raghuram Rajan. Because of friend shoring, the economic efficiency might get compromised. That is why this is incorrect and this is the right answer. Okay, now coming to the vision of Viksit Bharat. Now this is the blueprint of Viksit Bharat which the finance minister has laid out in this year's interim budget. What is that vision? Let's try to understand. As per the finance minister, Viksit Bharat means, the way she has defined Viksit Bharat, a prosperous Bharat in harmony with nature, with modern infrastructure and providing opportunities for all the citizens and all the regions to reach their potential. So, when I say Viksit Bharat, understand Viksit Bharat is not just about increasing the GDP size. Viksit Bharat is equally about ensuring environmental sustainability. It is also about promotion of inclusive growth and development. So, while delivering her budget speech, in fact, Finance Minister highlighted that when we say GDP, GDP would not just mean gross domestic product, GDP would also mean governance, development and performance. So as you can see, GDP, governance, development and performance. And taking this forward, the finance minister has focused or highlighted that the government will continue to focus on inclusive growth with the mantra of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas and Sabka Prayas, where the government would continue to focus on 4 major castes which include farmer, women, poor and youth. The question is, where can you use these points? You can directly use these points in mains answer writing as fodder points. I hope it is clear. Now, as far as India's vision of Viksit Bharat or developed country is concerned, if I want to say it objectively, what does it mean? Now, this is something which has been given by RBI, not by the government. Now, if you see, World Bank classifies the different countries based upon per capita income. And this per capita income is revised every year. It does not remain same. And this per capita income is revised every year to take into account the rising prices. Can you see India's per capita income? India has a per capita income of 2,300 US dollar. With this amount of per capita income, India is in lower middle income country now. And India has a vision to become a Viksit Bharat by the end of 2047. That is the time when India will be celebrating 100 years of independence. And it is being said, if India has to become a developed country by 2047, our per capita income should increase to 21,000 US dollar. Can you see by what extent our per capita income should increase? Almost 10 times. For that to happen, RBI has said that our real GDP should grow by almost 7.6% per year for next 25 years, which is going to be obviously very challenging as far as India is concerned. So this is what is important. Now, as far as this aspect is concerned, one thing which becomes important is what are the challenges before India in becoming developed country by 2047. These aspects of what are the challenges for India for becoming a developed country by 2047, this becomes important from the perspective of mains, and it also becomes important from the perspective of interview. But since our focus is mostly on prelims, I'm not going into detail, but this is something which I have covered in a separate interview guidance program which I had conducted recently. It is there. This aspect, this video is there on the YouTube. Those of you who are going to attend the interview, for you this topic becomes quite important. Please go through this particular video discussion to know what are the challenges for India to become a developed country and what are the strategies highlighted by RBI to ensure that India becomes a developed country. So please go through those things. Now we have covered this aspect. Now we'll quickly go into the second aspect, that is agriculture. With respect to agriculture, these are some of the things which we'll quickly have a look at, and this is mainly factual things. So we'll quickly look at these factual things and this part quickly. Okay. The first initiative under the theme of agriculture is the launch of Atmanirbhar Oil Seeds Abhiyan. Why is this important? As you can see in prelims 2023, the latest, there was a question about one oil seed. And what is that? Niger. This was a question which is asked in prelims 2023. Same way, in prelims 2019, there was a question among the agricultural commodities imported by India, which one of the following accounts for highest imports in terms of value in the last 5 years? And the answer to this is vegetable oils. So that is why it has become quite important. So what we'll do is we'll quickly understand some aspects about the oil seeds. Now, what things become important from the perspective of your prelims examination. So in the prelims, they might ask you questions with respect to important trends in the production as well as area of oil seeds. And that is what we will quickly understand. Based upon that, you would have this particular practice question number 13. So let's have a look at that point. So you can see, with respect to present status, right now, we are growing 9 major oil seeds, which include soybean, groundnut, mustard, rapeseed, Niger, sunflower, and safflower. India is presently considered to be the 4th largest producer of oil seeds, where the total production of oil seeds is 40 million tons. The production of oil seeds in the last 5 years has actually increased in India. Production has increased. Production wise, when you look at these 9 major oil seeds, among all these 9 major oil seeds, the largest production is of soybean, followed by mustard and groundnut. Oil seeds can be cultivated in both Kharif as well as Rabi season. But the production of oil seeds in the Kharif season is higher than the Rabi season. Why is this important? Can you see here? This was a question which was asked in prelims 2023. So based upon this kind of question, I'm discussing these aspects about oil seeds. The largest producer of oil seeds is Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. It is Rajasthan followed by Madhya Pradesh. But right now there is huge demand supply mismatch in oil seeds, wherein, as you can see, India is the largest importer of edible oils now. So India is not only importing crude oil, we are also importing edible oil. Import of crude oil is quite understandable because India does not have sufficient reserves of crude oil. But don't you think we should not import edible oils? Because we have to we can increase the production of oil seeds and process the oil seeds into edible oils that way. So right now, 60% of edible oil which is used in India is imported. And look at this fact. More than 90% of palm oil that we use in India is imported from Indonesia and Malaysia. That is why, in order to increase the production of oil seeds, we are going to launch a program called as Atmanirbhar Oil Seeds Abhiyan. This is what you should know. Now, these are some things which are purely from the perspective of your prelims examination. As far as the mains examination is concerned, there are other things like what initiatives has the government taken, what are the challenges in the production of oil seeds, and what are the strategies needed in the production of oil seeds. These aspects become important from the perspective of the mains examination. I'm anyway including this in the PPT. Please go to these aspects because you might get a question in UPSC mains with respect to the oil seeds. I hope this part is clear. I have focused only on the prelims part. Mains wala part, it is self-explanatory. Please go to this part. I have provided you the content. So based upon this, let's quickly solve the question asked here as a practice MCQ. Look at this practice MCQ. India is the world's largest producer of oil seeds. It is not the world's largest producer. We know it is the world's 4th largest producer. So the statement is incorrect. Amongst different category of oil seeds, soybean accounts for the highest share. Yes. The production of oil seeds in Kharif season is more than the production in the Rabi season. Yes. The right answer is 2 only. I hope this part is clear. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to take up the next part. The next part is Finance Minister has announced that a comprehensive program would be launched for the development of dairy sector. Now, with respect to dairy sector, can I say, as far as your mains examination is concerned, in your mains there is a separate line, the economics of animal rearing. It's a separate line mentioned in GS paper 3. It means you might get a separate question in UPSC mains on the dairy sector. So with respect to the mains aspect of the dairy sector, you might get a question about what are the strengths of the dairy sector, what are the initiatives which the government has taken for the dairy sector, and what are the challenges of the dairy sector, which I have obviously incorporated in the PPT for your self-reading. You should be able to go through this aspect. My focus is on the prelims aspect about the dairy. That is what I'm going to cover. Okay, please have a look at the prelims aspects. In particular, this is directly from the annual report of the ministry. And as you can see, this blue color shows the production of milk. And can you see the production of milk has steadily and gradually gone on to increase, such that presently India is the largest producer of milk, accounting for 24% of the global milk production, which is like 25%. 1/4 of the global milk production actually takes place in India. Milk production consistently increased in last decade. And look at the third point. Third point is very interesting, which clearly shows the per capita availability of milk. If you look at the total milk production divided by population, the per capita milk availability in India is 444 grams per day. And the most significant part, as you can see here, this for India is higher than the global average. Normally, in most of the parameters, India's average is lower than the global average, but here it is good that our per capita milk availability is more than the global average. And when you look at the production of milk from different sources, around 45% of the milk is produced from the buffaloes in India. So these are some prelims aspects about the milk production. So based upon that, let's quickly look at the question here. Practice MCQ number 14. India is the world's largest producer of milk. Correct. The share of cooperative sector in the overall milk production is around 90%. When you go through my main slide, which I have shown to you, you'll get to know that the milk production in India has come to be dominated more so by the unorganized sector. When I say unorganized sector, means individual farmers. So the milk production is more by individual farmers. The milk production by the organized sector means cooperatives as well as private sector. The milk production by the organized sector in India is quite low, which is obviously one of the biggest problem or challenges with respect to dairy sector. Don't you think we need to increase the share of the organized sector, that is cooperatives as well as the private sector? That is why I have framed this particular statement. So second statement is incorrect. The per capita milk availability is higher than the global average. Yes. So right answer is only 2. Okay. Keeping this, let's move to the next part. The next part is with respect to fisheries sector. The finance minister has announced that the government will undertake a complete revamp of Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, a program to boost the fisheries sector. Now, there are some prelims pointers about the fisheries sector. Let's quickly have a look at that. As you can see, India is presently the third largest producer of fish in the world and second largest producer in aquaculture. Once again, can you see the production of fisheries in India? it has consistently and gradually increased in the last 1 decade. Apart from that, fisheries can be produced both from inland as well as marine sector. And as you can see, the share of inland sector in the overall production, this inland, is much higher than the marine sector. So this is one important thing. Now this is the present status. But if you go back 20 years back, that is at the start of 2000, that time the share of marine and inland was equal, 50:50. But now the share of inland fisheries is 75 and marine is 25. Earlier 2001 it was 50:50. Now it is like 75 inland and 25 marine. That's one important development which you should know. Based upon that, please have a look at this particular question. With respect to present status of fisheries sector, consider the following statement. India is the third largest producer of fish. Like I said, yes. India ranks first in terms of aquaculture. It is not first, it is second. First is China. Gujarat is the largest producer of fish. What do you think? Which state in India is the largest producer of fish? Can you guess? Which state is the largest producer of fish? Anyone? Yes. Yes, good. Good, Anisha. Good, Abhishek. So the largest producer of fish in India is AP, Andhra Pradesh. Right? So the first statement is correct, second statement is incorrect, third statement is also incorrect. So right answer is only one. Share of inland fisheries is higher than the marine fisheries in India, correct? There has been increase in the share of inland fisheries in the overall sector in the last 20 years. Like I said, it is correct. So right answer is both 1 and 2. Okay, now coming to the initiative of the government to promote nano diammonium phosphate. So the finance minister has announced that the government would introduce nano diammonium phosphate in order to increase the efficiency of fertilizers. This announcement of the finance minister comes after the launch of nano urea as well as urea gold. That is why it becomes quite important. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to discuss nano urea as well as urea gold through practice based MCQ. Let's have a look at the prelims based question asked in prelims 2016. Please read the question here. It says, why does the government of India promote the use of neem coated urea in agriculture? Why are we coating the urea with neem? This was a question asked in prelims 2016. Now you must understand the neem coating of urea is done for two purposes. Number one, there is an economic purpose. What is that economic purpose? See, earlier government was providing subsidized urea to the farmers. But what used to happen was this subsidized urea which is given to the farmer, this urea used to get diverted for industrial purpose. So it's like urea which is a fertilizer in agriculture, the same urea is a raw material in industries. So government was supplying urea at subsidized prices to the farmers, but this urea at lower prices was also bought by industries. So don't you think it was leading to a huge loss for the farmers? So in order to ensure that the urea which is given to farmers is unfit for industrial purpose, we started coating the urea with neem. So there is an economic reason for that. But apart from economic reason, there is another important reason. What is that reason? The reason here is to improve the efficiency of urea. How we will increase the efficiency of urea? So you must understand that urea is a source of nitrogen. So when we supply urea to the agricultural fields, when we put urea on the soils, what happens here, that most of the nitrogen which is based in urea, which is part of urea, most of the nitrogen gets leached into the soils. It gets lost in the soil. The extent of nitrogen which is taken up by the crops will get reduced. Apart from that, some of the nitrogen will also get converted into gas, and it will lead to emission of the nitrogenous gases. So it is being said that more than 50% of nitrogen which is based in urea gets lost either in soils or either gets converted into gas. So it is being said that urea, if you are able to coat with neem will reduce the breakdown of nitrogen, which is urea. So when neem breaks down, reduces the breakdown of the nitrogen, more amount of nitrogen will be available to crops, less amount of nitrogen will get leached, less amount of nitrogen will get converted into gas, more amount of nitrogen will be taken up by the plants, right? So that is why if you look at this question, the right answer to this question is neem coating slows down the rate of dissolution of urea in the soil. That's the answer. Look at practice MCQ number 17. Which among the following statements is incorrect with respect to nano urea? What do you think? Nano urea, what is incorrect? I hope everyone knows the basics. Nano urea is based upon the nanotechnology, and it is actually produced by IFCO, a farmers cooperative. So what do you think is the answer? Which among the following is incorrect with respect to nano urea? Can you guess? Okay. Nano urea is more efficient and cheaper than normal urea. Yes, indeed. For example, it is being said when you use a normal urea, you need to use one entire bag. Like the bag would be like 45 to 46 kg. But nano urea, 500 ml. So 500 ml of nano urea can replace an entire bag of normal urea, which clearly shows that it is more efficient and cheaper, which is correct. Nano urea is produced by energy efficient, environment friendly production process with less carbon footprint. Yes, it is correct. Government does not fix the MRP of nano urea. You'll be surprised to know that government does not fix the MRP of nano urea. The nano urea as such is sold by IFCO, and IFCO is selling the nano urea at a very less price. So government is in a way not fixing the MRP. So if you see normal urea ka MRP is fixed by the government. Government itself is saying that normal urea bag has to be sold at a particular price. It is fixed. But in case of nano urea, the price of nano urea is not fixed. The MRP is not fixed by the government. It is fixed by IFCO itself. So which is correct in a way. D. Nano urea should be applied through soil to increase its effectiveness. What do you think about it? It is being said nano urea should not be applied on the soil. In fact, nano urea should be sprayed on the leaves of the plants. So it should be applied through follicular. So that is why, the incorrect statement here is D. I can see most of you again the answer as C, but you should have checked the answer D also, option D also. Then you should have got the right answer. I hope it is clear, everyone. These are the kind of questions which UPSC will generally ask, right? Okay. So there is no subsidy on nano urea, please understand, because as it is, the nano urea is very cheap as compared to urea bag. Practice MCQ number 18. Which among the following are the benefits of urea gold? What is urea gold? Urea gold is the urea which is coated with sulfur. Urea coated with sulfur is urea gold. But why is it called as gold? Because when you coat urea with sulfur, it gives that golden color. That is why it is called as urea gold. Now, why are we coating urea with sulfur? Number one, when you coat urea with sulfur, it will help us address the sulfur deficiency in the Indian soils. Second, when we coat urea with sulfur, it ensures slow release of nitrogen into soil and hence enhances fertilizer efficiency. And when we coat urea with sulfur, it is considered to be more environment friendly as compared to normal urea. Now, why is it environment friendly? If you apply normal urea, like I said, the normal urea gets leached into the soil, or normal nitrogen gets leached into soil, or nitrogen may get added to the water as such, which is obviously hurting our environment. It is leading to water pollution, right? But when we coat urea with sulfur, it will ensure more absorption of nitrogen by the plants. So less amount of nitrogen will get leached. So that way it is more environment friendly, right? So right answer in this case is all the three. This is how you'll get a question about urea gold or nano urea. I hope it is clear, right? So if you just know that the government has launched nano DAP or nano urea, I don't think that's going to help you, because UPSC will go into little deeper aspects and ask you about some important aspects of nano urea, urea gold, and so on. And that is what I have done here. Taking it forward, I have highlighted all the aspects about nano fertilizers. I hope you should be able to go through this, right? I will be sharing the PPT, go through this aspect. Now there are some two schemes mentioned in the agriculture. One scheme is PM Kisan and the other scheme is PM Formalization of Micro Enterprises Scheme. Let's quickly understand these schemes through the MCQ based questions. First question is PM Kisan scheme. This scheme seeks to provide for income transfer of rupees 6,000 per year to the farmers. 6,000 is correct, per year is correct, and it is transferred to farmers. So it is correct. The benefit is applicable for all the farmers, including the tenant farmers and sharecroppers. It is not including tenant farmers and sharecroppers. It is only including the land owning farmers. People or farmers who own land, only they will get the benefit. It is a centrally sponsored scheme implemented by Ministry of Agriculture and Family Welfare. Yes, PM Kisan is implemented by Ministry of Agriculture and Family Welfare, but PM Kisan is not a centrally sponsored scheme. Rather, it is central sector scheme. And we all know what is the central sector scheme. 100% financing is by the center alone. So that is why, when you see the right answer here, the right answer happens to be only one. Same way, with reference to Prime Minister Formalization of Micro Enterprises Scheme, consider the following statements. Basically, this particular Hello, am I audible now? Am I audible now? Okay, so we had some technical issue, right? Okay, anyways, when you look at this particular question about formalization of micro enterprises, uh, all the three statements here are correct. So right answer is all the three. So the details about PM Kisan scheme as well as details of Prime Minister formalization of micro enterprises scheme, I have given it here. So you can just go through this scheme in detail. Apart from that, when you go back to the main theme of agriculture, which I started here, as you can see, I have covered this aspect, announcement in the interim budget. I have also covered schemes mentioned in the budget speech. Now the third aspect, that is agricultural statistics 2023. When you look at this agricultural statistics 2023, as of end of 2023, we do not have the latest statistics. Right now, we have the statistics as of the end of 2022, and which I guess should be sufficient as far as your prelims examination is concerned. So what I have done, I have summarized all the important agricultural statistics which can be asked in your UPSC prelims in this particular PPT. So let me just show you here the statistics part. So this is the overall contribution of agriculture sector, contribution of different subsectors within the agriculture sector, trends in the growth rate, trends in the cropping pattern, trends in the crop production. So all these important trends I have incorporated in the PPT, which I'm pretty sure you should be able to go through because it is mostly factual. Once if you go through, you'll be able to understand. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the next theme. The next theme is infrastructure development. From this theme of infrastructure development, we look at the announcement in the interim budget, then the schemes mentioned in the budget speech. Now here we'll start with the first thing, that is viability gap funding for offshore wind energy projects. For which what we'll do, we'll first understand what is the present status of energy sector in India. Why is it important? That is the present status of energy sector. You can see in prelims 2022, you had this particular question about the various aspects of renewable energy. Gujarat has the largest solar park in India. Kerala has fully solar powered international airport. Goa has the largest floating solar photovoltaic project in India. This was the question asked in 2022. Based upon that, we'll discuss some aspects of energy sector and then we will solve this practice question, right? So let's start with the energy sector. Right now, if you see, as of June 2023, the latest data that we have, the total installed power capacity in India is 4.2 lakh megawatt. That is the total installed power capacity. And this graph here shows the share of different sources in the installed power capacity. And no wonder the major source of electricity in India is thermal power, 57%. But look closely at renewable energy. Renewable energy is 31%, but we have also declared large hydropower to be part of renewable energy. So large hydropower, if you include it in renewable energy, the total share of renewable energy in the installed power capacity will be 31 plus 11, which is 42%. You must be knowing, when India submitted its nationally determined contribution way back in the year 2015, we had committed that 40% of installed capacity shall be from non-fossil fuels. This objective we have been able to achieve because the share of renewable energy is now 42%. This is what you should know. And among the various renewable energy sources, you can see The largest source is of solar power, followed by wind power. This is another important prelims pointer that you should know. The solar power is 67,000 megawatt, wind power is 43,000 megawatt. That is what you should understand, right? So let's go back to the prelims MCQ here. Prelims practice question number 21. Consider the following statements related to the present status of renewable energy in India. Tamil Nadu is the largest producer of wind energy in India. Yes. Rajasthan is the largest producer of solar energy in India. Yes. The share of solar energy in the installed power capacity is higher than that of wind energy. Yes. So right answer is all the three. Same way, if you look at the practice MCQ number 22, India first submitted its first nationally determined contribution to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in the year 2015. How many of the following targets have been achieved by India so far? That is by the end of 2023. To reduce emission intensity of its GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030 from 2005-11, to achieve 40% cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel, and to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent through forest and tree cover. So when you look at this particular question, practice MCQ number 22, how many targets do you think India has been able to achieve so far? What do you think is the answer to this? Anyone? So, if you see, India has been able to achieve this target. India has been able to achieve this target, but India has not been able to achieve the third target. And that is why, what has happened is when India has submitted its second set of nationally determined contribution, in the second set of nationally determined contribution, India has reiterated the third target once again. So as per PIB, Press Information Bureau, India has achieved this and this. Please understand that. So the right answer in this case is only 2. I hope it is clear. Okay. Now coming to the second last topic of our discussion, the second last, which is the concept of viability gap funding. So let's understand what is viability gap funding, right? And then we'll understand what is the recent announcement. I hope everyone knows PPP, public-private partnership. It is basically a contract between the government and the private sector. Now, there are some public-private partnership projects which are economically justified and they are financially sustainable. When I'm saying economically justified means it is important in order to promote growth and development. Financially sustainable means once the project is executed, the private sector which is executing the project will be able to recover the money which it has invested. How? Let me just give a simple example. Let's say we are setting up a national highway between Delhi to Mumbai through public-private partnership. Now this particular national highway is economically justified, right? Because it will promote growth and development. At the same time, this national highway is financially sustainable. How it is financially sustainable? Because once this national highway is created by the private sector, the private sector obviously can erect toll. After erecting toll, the private sector can collect revenue. By collecting revenue, the private sector can actually recover the investment which it has made, right? So it is financially sustainable that way. But here, there might be some PPP projects which are economically justified but financially they might be unsustainable. What is financially unsustainable means? Think here, for example, we are constructing a road between two cities in India where the traffic volume, that is the number of vehicles which are going to move along this particular road, traffic volume is less. Since the number of vehicles using that particular road is less, traffic volume is less, even if the private sector erect a toll, can I say the private sector will not be able to recover its investment? It means if you look at this particular project, it is economically justified, but financially it is not sustainable. Don't you think if it is financially not sustainable, private sector will not come forward to make investment in such projects? But we need investment even in such projects also. So to encourage private sector investment in the PPP projects which are economically justified but financially unsustainable, we have come up with a scheme called as viability gap funding. What happens in the viability gap funding? In the viability gap funding, government will give certain grants to the private sector. Government will give some money to the private sector. Grants, it's not a loan, it's a grant. Why is the grant given? Grant is given to make the project viable, right? So to ensure the viability of the particular project. So that grant is given. So that is what is viability gap funding. So please do understand, viability gap funding is not for PPP projects which are financially sustainable or financially viable. Viability gap funding is only for those projects which are financially unviable. I hope this part is clear. Keeping this as a background, let's go back to the question here. Okay, let's read this. Support the PPP projects which are economically justified but financially unviable. Which all projects will get the money from the government? PPP projects which are awarded by the center, state or the statutory bodies. Private sector company should be selected on the basis of bidding. There's a bidding which takes place. On the basis of bidding, the private sector company is selected. And the criteria for bidding is amount of viability gap funding. Means different private sector companies will bid. How much money they need from the government. The entity which is asking for least amount of money, that entity will be chosen to execute a particular project. That is viability gap funding. What is the nature of support? Money is given in the form of grant. It is not a loan. The question is, how much money is given? Grants. Now, depending upon the kind of infrastructure project which we are executing, can you see the nature or the amount of grant which is given is varying. Take for example, you are executing a physical infrastructure like road, railway, port, airport, etc. In that case, the government will give a maximum grant of 40% of the project cost. So the project cost is rupees 100, government might give a grant of up to rupees 40. And when I'm saying government, which government? Center will give 20%, maximum 20%. State or the government agency which is allocating that PPP project, like in case of National Highway, the agency which will allocate the PPP project is National Highway Authority of India. So the state or the statutory body will give 20%. So maximum 40% for physical infrastructure. For social infrastructure, it is 60% of the project cost, 30% center, state or statutory body 30%. There are certain pilot projects. Pilot project means demonstration projects. Like we want to attract more private sector investment in, say, education or let's say health. Like you want to set up district hospitals through public-private partnership. It's like a pilot project. There, the government will give more funding to attract private sector in education and health. For example, the government funding is up to 80%. This scheme is implemented by Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. So this is viability gap funding. Why is it important? Because government in this year's budget has highlighted that government will soon provide viability gap funding for offshore wind energy projects. Most of the wind energy projects in India are onshore, which is on the existing land. We want to promote offshore wind energy projects, but it is being said the offshore wind energy projects are more costly. They might be financially unviable. Don't you think setting up of offshore wind energy projects is economically justified? But it is financially unviable. That is why we have come up with viability gap funding for offshore wind energy projects. Based upon that, look at the practice MCQ number 23. With reference to viability gap funding scheme, consider the following statements. It provides financial support only to the financially viable PPP projects. It's not financially viable. It should be financially unviable. The nature of financial assistance is in the form of loans at cheaper rate of interest. No, it is grant. The scheme is implemented by Ministry of Finance. Yes. So answer is only one statement is correct. So that is what is important as far as this thing is concerned. Now coming to the last topic of today's discussion. The last topic of today's discussion is scheme for financial assistance to the states for capital investment. So here the government has said that it will provide for almost 70,000 crores as financial assistance to the states for capital investment. What is this scheme? Let's try to understand. Number one, what is the mandate of the scheme? Center is giving 50-year interest-free loans to the states for creation of capital assets. So it's like the center is giving loans so that the states can increase their capital expenditure. The loans are given for 50 years and it is completely interest-free. Number of parts. Now this is something which is interesting. Under this scheme, you have totally 7 parts. Under these 7 parts, center is giving loans to the state for creation of capital assets. But here, when you look at the different parts, the parts vary based upon for what purpose the loans are given for. Let's try to understand this. Part 1, we can see center is giving loans to the states, different states, based upon their share in the central divisible pool. What is the state share in the central divisible pool? Who is fixing it? 15th Finance Commission. So whatever is the share of the state in the central divisible pool of taxes, the state will get a same share of money from the part 1 component of the scheme. Let me just give an example. Bihar gets a share of 10% of taxes from the central divisible pool of taxes based upon the recommendations of 15th Finance Commission. If Bihar is getting 10% of the central divisible pool, Bihar would get 10% of the part 1 funds allocated to all the states. I hope that part is clear. So it's like under part 1, let's say we have kept 100 crores. 10% of this 100 crore, which is like 10%, goes to state of Bihar. And you can see these loans are given without any conditionalities. The only condition here is that the loans should be used for capital expenditure. What are part 2 and part 7? Not really important as far as your exam is concerned, but broadly look at the part 2 to part 7. In the part 2 to part 7, the center is giving conditional loans. Can you see the difference? Unconditional loans in part 1, conditional loans in part 2 to part 7. Conditional loans are given to states when the states are fulfilling certain conditions. What conditions? For example, if states are monetizing their assets, if states are bringing about reforms in the municipal, if states are undertaking digitization of its processes, only when the state brings about these reforms, they'll get funding from the center. So it's like center is incentivizing the states to bring about reforms. So if the states bring about the reforms, only then they'll get the funding. So it's in a way conditional. But whatever money the center gives the states, that money should be compulsorily used only for creation of assets. If you see the corpus, the corpus right now for this present year is, I'll update this last part, don't worry. The corpus for the present year is almost like 70,000 crores. That is this particular scheme. Based upon that, let's quickly have a look at the practice question number 25. Please have a look at the practice question number 25. With reference to scheme for financial assistance to the state for capital investment, consider the following statements. Under this scheme, center provides interest-free loans to the state for creation of assets. Correct? All the loans given under this scheme are unconditional, and hence states have complete flexibility in utilization of funds. Not all the loans are unconditional. So the right answer in this case is 1 only. Right? Look at this question. Practice MCQ number 24, the last question of the day. Let's have a look. All of you, please take a look at the answer question. What do you think is the answer to the practice MCQ number 24? With reference to present borrowing by the states, consider the following statements. The states can borrow from outside India based upon the security of consolidated fund of state. The center can limit the borrowings of the states if the states have outstanding loans from the center. The states can borrow money from RBI to address their temporary mismatches in the cash balances. What do you think? Okay. Look at the first statement. The states can borrow money from outside India. Yes, states can indeed borrow money from outside India. It has been allowed since 2017. But look at the second part. They could borrow money based upon the security of consolidated fund of state. They cannot borrow money based upon the security of consolidated fund of state. They borrow money from outside India based upon the guarantee of the center. When the center gives them guarantee, only then they can borrow from outside India. So that is why the first statement is incorrect. Center can limit the borrowings of the states if states have outstanding loans from center. Yes. The states can borrow money from RBI to address temporary mismatches. Yes. So right answer is only 2. I hope this part is clear, everyone. Right? So in this particular video discussion, we have covered the 3 major aspects of the interim budget, which is the basic overview of the Indian economy, the theme of agriculture, as well as the theme of infrastructure. This is what we have covered. Next week, same time, I shall be covering the remaining dimensions of the interim budget, where I shall be starting with the theme of inclusive growth and development. The second theme would be sustainable development, and the third theme would be external sector. So by the end of next week, we shall be done with the entire discussion of the interim budget. I hope you are clear, right? Thank you so much. It was wonderful taking your session, right? In case if you have any doubts, you can always reach out to me. You can always mail me your doubts. I'll address all your doubts on the mail. Thank you so much. It was wonderful taking your session. Thank you.